Hi, everyone. So welcome back. It's been, I think, 2 weeks since we last checked in to do an ETA workshop. And so the purpose, just as a kind of refresher for the last workshop, was to talk a little bit more about the ETA program, what it does, how to think about selecting a country, reviewing the Fulbright webpage to better understand how to assess country descriptions and access external links that can give you more information about a country that you might be interested in. And so hopefully you've all had a chance to kind of be thinking in the last couple of weeks or so about where you might want to go. And during this particular call today, we're going to talk more about the application components that go into an English teaching assistantship grant, what you're going to have to do. And so this might be jumping the gun a little bit for some people if you haven't quite picked a country, but it'll maybe start to give you some ideas about just why it might be necessary to pick one country over another if you're looking at some of the content that goes into these components. So that's kind of what our purpose is today, and I'll take you through that, and I'll try to offer some tips along the way. There'll be more writing workshops that we're going to do in the summer, where we'll be working with the Writing Center, and we'll be able to guide you more specifically when it comes to the written components of the application. But I also want to be able to give you kind of some insider knowledge about what it's like as a National Selection Committee member, because in addition to being a Fulbright Program Advisor here at the University of Houston, I review applications for one of the Germany ETA committees. So I'm very familiar with some of the basic criteria that play a big role in, what an application will be assessed upon. So that's kind of to give you some insider knowledge about what we're looking at. And I'll try to explain that in as much detail as possible. And so this is a chance for you also to ask questions of somebody who has seen this from an insider's perspective. So you should feel free to kind of ask questions as we go along. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here to the homepage that you surely all see in your sleep now. So let me just do this. So you should be able to see that. Okay. I'll just assume that you can see that. So the place to kind of look really to start for thinking about application materials, first off, for those of you who are kind of wondering, how do I open an application? You want to scroll over the Applicants tab, and you want to go down here to Fulbright Online application. And so for those of you, and here I go, I get sent to another window. For those of you who are certain of more or less where you want to apply, this is definitely a good idea to go in, create a first-time user account, and then you'll click here in the future to log back in. Even if you're not sure about where you want to go just yet, you could go in and create an account. You don't have to pick a country right away. Once you create a application account in here, I will be able to see your application once you select the University of Houston, which if you're going through the UH process, which if you're on this call, you're going through the UH process of applying for Fulbright, you would pick that option. It's pretty simple. And so there's some basic biographical information that you could fill out right now if you wanted to with the application. That'll save you some time later on. There's parts that you don't really need to touch right now. So abstract questions, those really need to be paired with your written materials, the essays, which I'll talk more about momentarily. But if you wanted to put in stuff like address, school, grant type for which you're applying, if you know that you're doing ETA, all of that is perfectly fine. And even filling out some of the activities that you might be doing as well, or education, because this is just sort of the tedious kind of stuff that you would be doing later on anyway. So, try to, if you're able to get a head start on that, that's not a bad idea. So let me log out of this. So really we're talking, again, kind of about application components today. And like I said, I'll try to give you some input on kind of what you're going to be working with and what the lay of the land is here. And also how long some of these things are going to take, which might make you more apprehensive, or it might make you want to start working on this right now. So if you go over here to ETA, you'll find this screen, which again is in this horrible accordion style format where you have to actually click on the different bars to open it, right? So I just talked a little bit about the biographical data. This is something that you could start doing right now if you want to. You'll also have here program information. So, you can ignore this for the moment. because you don't need to fill out abstract and host community engagement. You don't need to fill out plans upon return to the US. This is stuff that all needs to be paired with your essays. So let's just talk about that later on. The abstracts are important though. They are actually one of the first things that we as reviewers read in your application. So when I get applications for Germany, and this will be the same way for any country, the first thing that comes on top is the Campus Committee Evaluation Form, which is the form that people like me, FPAs, write when we formally nominate you for the award. And so usually they're filled with plenty of laudatory remarks about you. You know, you're just the next Mother Teresa, you're the next Albert Einstein, you're all of these things, right? You're going to change the world. You might even be a Barack Obama potentially. And it's usually signed by an FPA like myself or another faculty member at the host institution. It's a nomination form essentially, where we tick a box and say, yes, we nominate this person. It has all sorts of other comments. But the next thing that comes up really is this project title, abstract summary, host country engagement. And so those answers are a way for us to kind of get sort of a preview of what's going to come in the rest of the application, namely in these documents here. So let me talk a little bit more about the statement of grant purpose and the personal statement. I'll give a brief overview, then I'll stop. I'll let you ask some questions if you have any, but I'll just explain first off kind of what these documents are. So for the English teaching assistantship, they are 1 page each. So you get 1 page, single spaced. Some of you might be going, that seems like a lot of space. Some of you might be going, that doesn't seem like much space at all. The answer is the latter. It's not much space at all, because there's going to be a lot of things that you're going to want to say about yourself potentially, but you're only going to have 1 page, single space to actually fit it in there. The statement of grant purpose, just like the personal statement, is formatted by writing statement of grant purpose on the first line, your name, host country, English assistant teaching program. Those are some logistics that we can talk about more later. But what the statement of grant purpose is really intended to do for the ETA is, unlike the personal statement, the statement of grant purpose is your action document. It is the document that we read to give us a better sense of what you will look like in a classroom. So as part of that, you're going to be talking about maybe previous experiences that you've had tutoring, teaching, mentoring, or possibly even learning a foreign language in a way that you're showing how you identify with your subjects and how they might have certain struggles learning, or what might work for you might potentially work for them. So you might, talk about some of that. You'll probably talk about ideas for the classroom. So you're going to go over to another country and you're going to be teaching English. And as part of that, you're not going to just be doing rote grammar memorization type lessons. Rather, you're going to want to develop and design lessons that give specific insights to your life in the United States, or what it's like being here, whether that means you live in Texas or whether you're in Hawaii. There might be certain things that you talk about to give your students a better idea of where you're from, because that's the mission of the program at the end of the day, to create mutual understanding between the US and another country. So while you're learning about them from living in the host community, you're imparting knowledge about to them, on them, about the United States through your teaching as one way of being there. The other thing that will also go in the statement of grant purpose is your host community engagement project. So for every Fulbright grant, Fulbright asks that you submit a project idea, community engagement activity idea. These terms kind of get used, they overlap a little bit. And so what this really is it's an idea that you have for an activity or something that you would like to do outside of the classroom. And this idea is just something that has to be plausible. But it should also kind of be an activity that facilitates exchange. And so let's say, for example, you are somebody who likes to garden, and you really enjoy spending time in a community garden where you might work in the US. And maybe you want to go to another country, and outside of the classroom, you're volunteering in a community garden where you're learning more about horticulture in, I don't know, you name the country, but also maybe having conversations with people about the kinds of things that you plant or that you harvest when you're back in the US. It could be as simple as joining an organization like a sports team and playing sports with them because it's a sport that you play back in the United States. Maybe you're big on public service, right? You did Bonner at UH or something like that, or you were part of an ACES program, and you want to volunteer your time working with people who serve the homeless or the needy. What I often suggest to students is, rather than overthinking this, try to think about ways that you meet people here in the US. Probably not joining like a video game club or something like that, but rather something that you do to meet people here, where you have interactions with people on a regular basis that you might be able to actually transport there. And I think that the community engagement project can be another way to kind of feature a part of who you are, something that you might not cover in your personal statement, you know, as opposed to writing a line in your personal statement that says, I love gardening. You could propose a host community engagement project that shows that you really enjoy being outdoors and things like that. And so we've had a number of students who have proposed really interesting projects and ideas. You know, another thing that you can sometimes put in your host community engagement project paragraph, and this is only really meant to be a paragraph, you can put a line in there about if you're going to a country where you don't know the language and there's not a language requirement, you know, or if you're going somewhere where there might be multiple languages spoken, you might talk about the fact that in your spare time you want to learn, pick up the language so you can better communicate with your host community. It shows an initiative to be more integrated in the country where you're going to be. And so that stuff is all good. The one really key component, I think, of the statement of grant purpose that has to be addressed, and usually this is in the very first paragraph of the statement of grant purpose, is why you're picking this country. So it might seem really banal the way that you explain this or the way you lead into it, but we often encourage students to say things like, I am applying to the Czech Republic because, and just to get right into the point. Because people like myself who are reviewers want you to get to the point, because we're reading a lot of these. And so if you come right out with your reasons and we can see that this is a really good fit potentially for you and also for the host country, you know, in terms of what you think that you can bring, that makes for a nice combination. And so it really helps us really understand why you need to be there, because one of the primary questions that reviewers are asking themselves is, why does this person need to be here to do this? And why here specifically? Why can't they go to some other country and do the same thing? And so this goes back to our previous workshop discussion of, you know, why are you picking the country that you're choosing? And so if you don't have good reasons that you're thinking about and reflecting upon right now, writing that first paragraph of the statement of grant purpose, where we have to talk about why this country, is going to be really challenging. And you can really lose your reader just after that first paragraph. Some countries, and I don't want to get too much into the technicalities of this, we'll talk a little bit about that you can state a preference. Spain allows you to pick a region. South Korea allows you to pick a level that you want to teach at. Germany allows you to suggest preferences or write preferences for 3 states that you might want to be in. If the country allows you to specifically indicate where you might want to go or the level that you can teach at, you should state the preference. Don't make the host commission work harder than they need to, thinking about, gee, where could this person go? You know, if you just tell them, it's not a guarantee that you're going to get your preference, but it'll help them place you more and give them a better sense of maybe where you might be a good fit for one of the schools that is participating in the program. Fulbright kind of gives some additional points here on their webpage, which I think are helpful and that I would also agree with here. We've talked about specific qualifications, training, or experience. You want to be specific here. You know, I participated in the Bonner WISE program for 2 years, working with students from underprivileged backgrounds at schools in the local Houston community. Okay, got it. We know who you're working with, we know how long. You can talk a little bit about certainly then what you did, right? What kinds of things worked for you teaching this environment? And it's also important to reflect a little bit on what you learned in that role as well. What specific ideas do you have for engaging with students in your host country? Okay, it does not suffice to say, we're gonna listen to music and play games, okay? Every half-assed application can contain that. You want to come up with more creative, innovative ideas that get to something that might be really interesting about the US or where you're from specifically. So you want to think about that. Come up with ideas. They don't have to be these grand ideas, but they can be things that will simply work for the age level that you're going to be at. And that's an important point, because for some of the countries that you're going to be choosing, it says what the level is going to be. It could be university level, it could be primary level. You know, if you're reading children's books at a university, probably not a good match, right? And if you're listening to podcasts at the primary school level, probably not a good match. So you're going to have to think a little bit about what might be appropriate for the audience that you're likely to be working with. What attributes do you possess that will help you in living in your working environment? That might go more in the personal statement. Okay, do not make your statement of grant purpose location specific within the host country, unless they tell you. That was the point that I was making before. So if they say, you know, you can indicate that you have a preference for a rural, an urban area, or primary or secondary level school, go for it. But in most cases, you're not going to be able to make that indication in there because they place you where there's demand. Any questions about the statement of grant purpose? Or Nimrod, do you think there's any things that I'm maybe leaving out? Okay. I've been chewing this gum for 3 hours. So let's move on then to the personal statement. So the personal statement is a little bit different than the statement of grant purpose in the sense that I would say it's less structured. So whereas for the statement of grant purpose, you really want to kind of get into it with why this country and then start hitting on your teaching experience and then your ideas for the classroom and maybe finish with a host community engagement project or some combination thereof. For the personal statement, as I've said in a lot of the courses that I've taught and also just workshops where I've been talking about personal statements, there really is no formula. The thing to know about the personal statement really is this is your, not the action piece, but your motivation piece. It's the, you know, why are you interested in doing this? What's gotten to the point now to say, like, this is why I want to go teach English in another country for 9 to 10 months. And there are so many ways that you could answer this question, right? So it's not going to be as simple as just saying, like, here's the one reason. There might be a number of reasons. But you want to certainly think about some of the influences in your life, your personal history, family background, as it states here, educational, professional, and cultural opportunities that you might have had. You know, the personal statement's also a really good way to kind of show that you're a good cultural ambassador. And I think that that matters a lot more for the English teaching assistantship than it does for the study research, because you're really going to be in a classroom where you need to be accessible and able to convey information. And so the ability to talk to other people, the ability to get out of your comfort zone, to be adaptable, to be flexible, all of that is really important when you're writing something like a personal statement. So it's not a resume in prose. I think I've talked to students before about that, where you're just sort of listing all these things. Rather, there's going to be very specific things that you want to highlight. And they should all be relevant to your motivation for doing this program. And so we've had a lot of different types of personal statements that students have submitted before, and they're all very unique to the individual that's actually writing it. I would really discourage you from going online and just looking up examples of Fulbright personal statements. What that person has written is unique to them. You need to be able to think about this in your own voice. And so in the process of applying for Fulbright, you know, I'm not going to give you examples of personal statements right off the bat, because I want you to think for yourself. I want you to be able to view your experiences through your own lens, as opposed to the lens of somebody else. We'll definitely share those with you later, because we have a number of students who have done a really great job writing some of these things. But the personal statement and the statement of grant purpose, what we'll really emphasize here in your writing is a combination of telling and showing, telling and showing. And so you'll have to make certain claims about yourself, but you'll also have to show us what you mean by that through examples. And in those examples, you're not just going to be describing your role and what happened and what you did, but we also want to know how you felt about that. Reflecting back on it, what did you think about that? And so a lot of our conversations that we have in the process of writing this are going to be pretty annoying, because I'm going to ask you a lot of questions about, well, what did that mean to you? Or why do you think you did that? Or, you know, what do you think you got out of that? Right? And this might be the first time that you're actually engaging with these types of questions and having to reflect upon them, but know that it's coming from good intentions, and it's also a way to prep you for the kinds of stuff that you need to be able to write in a personal statement ultimately, because It's not enough just to list. You need to be able to think about, what was really going on, and then start connecting that to other things that you were doing during your time, either as an undergraduate or before that, etc. Formatting is similar. One page, single space, that's all you get. So there's not a lot of room to write here. You cannot write in the header. You cannot mess with the margins. You're supposed to stick to all of that. I will say that, even though these are two different forms, the statement of grant purpose and the personal statement really should complement each other in some ways. And I can give some examples of that, really. We've had people who are, come from backgrounds where they're first generation, or where they didn't necessarily grow up with English as their first language. And maybe they're even immigrants to the United States who've gotten citizenship X number of years ago. And a big part of their motivation for applying is because they understand the struggles with language. They understand how difficult it is to acquire that. And it's what has kind of led them to help other people in that regard. And so they're picking countries that, where there might also be a large influx of immigrants that are going there. Some of their ideas for teaching in the classroom might be related to the US's immigration history, for example, or even Texas immigration history and sort of the patterns of migration that exist in Texas, to give people a better sense of, it's not all just cowboys out here. Rather, it's also, people, Spanish, French, Germans, Czechs, people of that nature. And so there's ways that you can kind of complement your background as somebody who's an immigrant with somebody who's talking about immigration in the US more generally as an idea that they want to convey about the United States in the classroom. We've had people also talk about, let me think here. Well, that's the first one that immediately comes to mind. I have to go through some other ones, but if you can get the two statements to speak to each other, that's a very good thing. And that's not going to happen on the very first try. And you're not going to write a perfect statement of grant purpose or a personal statement on the very first try. It's going to take many drafts. And so part of what this is about is also letting you know that, ideally it probably takes 3 to 4 months to write a good statement of grant purpose or personal statement. So the earlier that you can begin drafts, and the more that we can be communicating back and forth and exchanging feedback, the better, because it's going to be an iterative process. It's going to take some time. Any questions about the personal statement? Anything I've said there so far? And really, I'm just covering background information. It's not meant to be like a deeper dive just yet. So some of the stuff that we evaluate in a personal statement is, first off, do we find this person interesting? Do we think that they might be somebody who would be a good cultural ambassador, right? Have they put themselves in situations where that might be the case? Do they represent a part of the US that we think, really needs to be included in a program like this or represented? That leads to, ethnic, racial diversity, but it's also geographical diversity. There's not a lot of people from Hawaii applying for this program, right? There's just not a lot of people from Hawaii. There's not a lot of people from Texas applying from this program, or the Deep South, and that's always an advantage that our students have. And so kind of talking about coming from this region is always a good thing, or letting people know that you're from this region is a good thing. The personal statement, we also try to evaluate, where you've been coming from and where you're going. So if you're writing a personal statement that has kind of a future goal that doesn't really seem to align with Fulbright, or if the idea of teaching has just kind of come out of left field, it's going to be difficult to convince a committee that this is something that you need to do now. They're going to ask themselves, well, why do you really need this? You're going to go make a ton of money. Who cares, right? Just as one example. But there's a lot of different ways that you can argue this. In the last couple of years, we've seen more pre-med students who normally were not actively applying for this submit competitive applications, where they talk a lot about the fact that they want to be science communicators. They want to be people who convey important information that impacts health behaviors in communities, maybe even communities whose first language is not English, here in Houston. And that's a big part of why they see this as an essential part of their training, because they see themselves as more than just medical practitioners. Rather, they see themselves as people who are communicating critical information. And so that can, that could be a reason, right? And so there's a lot of different ways that you can justify that, but it's something that we'll work on and look for closely when actually drafting. Yeah. Statement of grant purpose, some stuff that we look for, I would say, is not just compelling reasons for a given country. Your ideas for the classroom are really key. Are you kind of mailing it in? Are you just sort of proposing ideas that are really generic that everybody could do? Or are they ideas that even work, right? So let's say you're going to Malaysia potentially, right? And the country description for Malaysia says that you're going to be in a rural community where there's unlikely to be many Western amenities. Okay, well, if you're proposing to do something that involves a lot of technology, there's no guarantee that that's in the classroom there, right? That's making a really big assumption. And so you want to pay close attention to whether or not the kind of thing that you're looking to do, not just is appropriate for the age level, but also appropriate for the place that you're going. Yeah, those are some of the most important things I would say for that. I'm going to cover a couple more of the different types of application components that you need to be aware of for the ETA. And then we can go back to the essays if you want to. The essays are the make or break of your application. I have seen applications, we've had applicants who've been accepted who have just had pitiful recommender forms. Folks who just really have not, and this is really unfortunate, it's not the student's fault in most cases, recommenders who have not taken the time to write a good recommendation, but the students wrote decent essays and were able to kind of get in on their own merit. I've seen students who, maybe didn't have the highest GPA, but they had a really compelling story. And as a result of that, what they wrote in their personal statement or statement of grant purpose was what got them in, and not necessarily the cumulative GPA on their transcript, because this is a holistic application review. So I can't stress enough just how much we really look at the essays. As a reviewer, I almost skip to it. I'll usually look at the person's school first, to figure out if I actually like them, try to get all the people from Boston College out of there and the University of Texas. And then after that, I'll usually look at the major, skim over the GPA, and then I want to know what they have to say. I want to hear them in their own voice, and then I'll read the recommender forms and the CCU form later on. But I want to hear you in your own voice. Okay, so next item on our agenda here is foreign language evaluations. This is a lot more text than really is necessary here, so why don't I just close this and tell you a little bit more about this. The foreign language evaluation form is really for students who are applying to countries where there's a specific language requirement. So, some of you might be asking yourselves, how do they know that I can speak the language? Well, the way that it works is we help you organize an evaluation with a faculty member here at the University of Houston who might speak that language. So let's say, for example, Sophia needs to be tested in Russian. Well, we might reach out to Dr. Rainbow or Dr. Berg, I think his name is. I know his first name's Alexei. Anyway, we might reach out to them and say, we have a student, Sophia Poznansky, who's applying for a Russian-speaking country, and would you be able to do a foreign language evaluation for the student because they need to be tested? And if the person agrees, then you would register the person in your application. This is all done in the application. They would receive a set of instructions, and you would then schedule an appointment with them to actually do the evaluation. They can carry out the evaluation however they want. You're being assessed on speaking, writing, listening, and reading. So those are the categories that they're going to test you on. And then once they're done, they'll be uploaded. You'll never ever see the results of it, but in most cases, our students do really well. So the foreign language evaluation form is really for countries where there is a language requirement. You absolutely have to have one submitted. I would not suggest doing the foreign language evaluation until the beginning of the fall semester. This will give you more time to work on your language skills. So if you just have not been practicing a given language for a while and you need to go back and kind of refamiliarize yourself with it, then you'll have time over the summer to do that. Plus, faculty tend to be less accessible over the summer, so it might be more challenging to get in touch with them. But during the semester, they obviously have to be here. For those people who, and I'll get to Sophia's question, for those people who know a language that might be useful for a country, but it's not required, you can submit a language evaluation for that. So we've had people, who apply to Tajikistan that might, where there's no language requirement, but maybe they know Farsi, submit a language evaluation for that. And that's, it's not required, but it's a good way to show the host country commission and the National Selection Committee here in the US that, hey, if you were placed on the ground in that country, you might actually be a better person for carrying out the mission of the Fulbright program because you know the host country language. You might be able to have more meaningful conversations with people while you're there. So I suggest to students, like we've had students do this for Vietnamese, we've had students do it for Mandarin, we've had students do it for other Western European languages where it's not required, but they do it anyway. Did that answer your question, Sophia? Okay. Any questions about the foreign language evaluation? Oh, another point about that. If you are being tested for a language for which we don't have that at UH, you can have somebody outside of the University of Houston test you on that language. So the example that my colleague at the Holy Cross likes to reference is, he's had students who have applied for Ukraine before, and they have literally called somebody from a Ukrainian Orthodox church to actually have this person administer a foreign language evaluation for a student. So, Fulbright will accept that. That's possible if it's not actually, the language isn't taught, it's a less commonly spoken language at the university. Let's talk a little bit about, let's do transcripts. This is easier. Transcripts, okay. For our campus committee deadline in late August, you only need to submit an unofficial transcript. For the national competition, we really urge you to submit an official transcript. Technically, you can submit an unofficial one, but the University of Houston unofficial transcript just looks like it was, I don't know what happened there, but it just doesn't even have the name of the University of Houston on it. So I think to give people a better impression of, and to let people know that this is a legitimate transcript, I usually suggest that students get an official transcript for the national deadline, which is October 12th. You're going to want to have that well before then. You probably don't need to order a transcript until the beginning of the fall semester, when all of your grades from the spring and maybe the summer, if you're taking summer courses, have already been included. It's another way to make sure that your GPA might be higher, or it might be another way to show that, like, you took a specific course. It could be language related, for example, that might help you. So I would wait until the beginning of the fall semester to do this, maybe in September, to order an official transcript, because it usually only takes a day or less if you're going to order it online. For those folks who've attended previous institutions, and I'm not sure if there's many on this call, but if you went somewhere else, this is usually more of an issue for graduate students. So if you had a previous undergrad institution, you need to get an official transcript from that school. If you did a learning abroad program, and that's through UH, and it's all included on your official UH transcript, you don't need to bother with a transcript from that institution. If you went to community college beforehand and transferred into UH, you don't need another transcript from your previous institution if it's already listed on your UH transcript, but it doesn't hurt to have it available just to submit it anyway, in case people have questions. So that would be my suggestion for that, in case you've actually studied somewhere else. Any questions about transcripts? Y'all are easy. Okay, so let's talk about recommendations then. The recommendations work a little differently for the ETA than they do for the study research. So for the ETA, you don't actually have to get a letter. Rather, your recommender is somebody who will be filling out a form. And so, like the foreign language evaluation, you will register this person in your application portal. That person will then get a link to fill out the recommendation form. and will submit that directly to the application. So again, you never see it. I can see it in the application. When it's submitted, I can't see it when people are working on it, but it's a form and it asks very specific questions, kind of, talking about you and your potential as a cultural ambassador, your ability to be in the classroom, your ability to be adaptable, flexible, things like that, other comments that they might have, things of that nature. For the recommenders, do not just register somebody without asking them. That is probably the worst thing that you can do. As a faculty member, that really pisses me off if all of a sudden a recommendation request has landed in my inbox and I did not previously know that this was going to be landing in my inbox. So you want to meet beforehand with people to ask them if they can be a recommender, and then let them know that they'll be getting a link from you and provide them with other information that will help them write the recommendation form. But even before that, you want to maybe have a conversation with myself or with Nimra about who might be a good recommender for you. So sometimes we have students who are really ambitious, and that's great, good for you, and really want to get this done in a timely manner, and they just reach out to the first person who knows them best. And that might not be the best person, right? It could be somebody that, supervised you in a summer job. It could be somebody who's your best friend. Those folks are not really good material for writing a recommendation form for Fulbright. Rather, you really want to be looking at people who are going to speak to a couple of different things. Your ability to maybe teach or tutor. So if you have people who have supervised you in a classroom before or in a service learning program and could talk about your commitment or your ability to work with students, that's great. We've had a number of Bonners who have had Dr. Irwing or previously Director Keene write recommendation forms. That's a really good source. We've had people from other programs like in Teach Houston or ACES who have had the same thing as well. We've had folks who were teaching assistants in a given department here at the University of Houston, and the faculty mentor who organized that was, the person who wrote the recommendation form. Other people that you might consider are folks who can talk about your ability to be a cultural ambassador and talk about some of your personal qualities. So you might think about, if you've done learning abroad, let's say you were a global guide in the UH Learning Abroad office, somebody there, who's seen you interact with people from all different backgrounds would be really good. Or somebody who's seen you working in Project Tree or PAIR, working with refugees, right? People coming from another country would also be really good. So kind of that ability to show some of your personal attributes as it relates to exchange and things of that nature is really good. You could certainly ask people who have seen you in the classroom. Maybe you were particularly active. Maybe you're just a really committed and dedicated student. You asked a lot of good questions. You were curious. Folks who could talk to some of your academic qualifications are also really good to pick as well. I suggest all of these to say that you can find recommenders who will give you a nice, well-rounded profile of you as an applicant. And so it's not helpful to just have 3 people who can only talk about your ability to teach, because they're probably all going to say the same thing. Right. So as a reviewer, I'm thinking, okay, yes, I've heard this. Karina, great, in the classroom, did this, wonderful, grand. And to hear that repeated over and over, it becomes redundant. So if you have some folks who can talk about some different things related to you and how you function, that gives me a much better sense of who you are as an applicant. And it also helps me make the determination in combination with your statement of grant purpose about whether or not I really want you to be in a classroom in this country. And so, think a little bit about 3 to 5 people beforehand who you might ask, and then talk to myself, talk to Nimra about who might be a really good person for you. There's Nim. So the reason why I stress this is because we are not allowed to remove any information from your application related to recommendation forms if it's submitted already. So what that means is, let me put it this way. Let's say you pick somebody who writes a lousy recommendation, and I kind of email you and go, yeah, what's the deal with so-and-so? Is there anybody else maybe who could write a recommendation for you? And I didn't know about this beforehand, right? Because they submitted this thing, and I'm just wondering if they can maybe go back, right? But the only way we can get that form out of the application until, as you see here, Friday, October 8th, is if that person emails Fulbright specifically and says, could you please take down my recommendation, which is kind of an embarrassing thing to have somebody do, because it's almost like an email of shame, sort of saying, could you please remove this? So the more that we can think beforehand about who might be really good and be strategic about our decisions, we can avoid those kinds of scenarios overall. You want to provide your recommenders with as much information as possible. Pick people as well who can write well in English. Pick people who you think they're going to write a lot. There's, in addition to some of the folks like your friends who you cannot ask, or family members, or people who've maybe seen you working in a summer job, there's other types of folks who are not really good at writing rec forms. If you did a political internship, whether it be for a campaign or somebody's office, those folks are terrible. Usually they farm out the letter to some lowly intern or staff person who might not really even know you that well, and they just want to get it done. And so it's not very thorough. You want to pick people who you think might be thorough, who might have a lot to say about you, and are just going to do a good job, because that's going to reflect on you when your application is being reviewed ultimately. The recommender is not up for the grant, even as embarrassing as their responses might be, in my opinion. Questions about the recommender form, or forms, I should say. It's a good idea, I would suggest, probably in the mid to late summer, to be thinking about who you'd want to ask for this. You don't want to just spring these things. So again, kind of faculty thinking about their timelines, right? Once the semester starts, it's going to be hell on wheels, right? For faculty, for students, there's a lot going on in the first weeks of the semester. Everyone's trying to get their bearings again. It's a lot harder to sit down and write a recommendation form and to take the time to do it well. So if you're able to catch some people before the semester starts, like right before, when they're starting to return their attention to students, then that might be a really good time to ask. So that would be my suggestion there. Start thinking in the middle of the summer about who might be a good recommender, having a conversation with us, and then actually reaching out to them. Other questions about components, things of that nature? If you've done research with somebody before, that could also be good. Someone who's seen you work, I think that's a good thing too. Okay. So I want to remind people as well, just again, about some of the useful tools that exist on the Fulbright website. So there's an application checklist page here that you can look at. That's a way to kind of make sure that you're staying on track with the different components that you need to submit. We also have a timeline that we can distribute to you if you would like, that sort of gives you a good sense of what you need to do, when you should ideally do it, and how long it's going to take. And it's got plenty of colors, so you can distinguish between the different components and things like that. And I'm happy to send that to whomever would like it. And also, before submitting the application, this is really not something that you're going to think about until the very end. They have a number of tips as well that you might want to consider. Another thing that I think that's really important here is if you go to the About section, again, the videos and tutorials for the ETA, there are a number of, let's see if I can find this, events and information sessions for students. So if you scroll down, later in the summer, there will be more panels about the ETA, the personal statement, statement of grant purpose, and writing some of these application components that will be really helpful for you. As I pointed out during our last workshop as well, they have up here, where is it, this ETA Alumni Ambassador panel. And that, I think, would be a good thing for you to go to. Generally speaking, if you have the opportunity to speak with somebody who was a Fulbrighter, you should take them up on that opportunity, because learning more about what it's like to be on the ground, what it's like to be in a classroom, will give you a better sense of what's possible, will give you a better understanding of usually what expectations are. And that's good, because the folks who are reading these applications, they know what the expectations are. And if you're kind of really missing the mark, right, or you're just sort of envisioning this year as something that it's clearly not, then that's going to be ultimately detrimental to your candidacy. So I think it's really good to hear from students, not just to get excited about the program, but also to learn a little bit more about what things really look like on the ground. In addition to things like blogs, where you can also kind of get a firsthand account of what people's time was like in country. And there is, I believe, this blog page here. There's a Fulbright U.S. Student Program blog that you can click on, where you can go through various years and you can, learn more about people who have been participating in the program. Okay. Any questions still? So at this point, some of you already know your countries. You could legitimately open an application. You could go in and start to be brainstorming so what you might be putting into a personal statement or a statement of grant purpose and scheduling a follow-up call with me. Others of you have not quite made a decision about where you want to go yet, or maybe even if you want to do this grant, but I'm giving you a preview of what you're ultimately going to have to do when you find yourself in the more intensive application stage. So as you're thinking about the country that you might want to pick, remember the first statement of the statement or first paragraph of the statement of grant purpose, where you're really going to have to explain to a reader why you want to go to this country specifically. That's going to have to come out there. So that's why we take the time to really talk out your preferences for a country, where you want to go, and reflect on reasons for being there specifically. I will stop sharing my screen here and just pose the question to the group one more time. Does anybody have any questions that they have, or urgent things that they want addressed while I'm on this call?
Could you send us the timeline?
I can do that, yeah. So make a note, Karina, to do that. Yeah, follow us on social media. We have a Vibrant account, an active account. That's all credit to Nimra. Other things? All right. Well, for those of you who joined today, thanks so much for listening in and posing questions and just really being serious about this opportunity. I would encourage you to, again, reach back out to me. I know it's kind of a stressful time right now with finals, so a lot of you are probably preoccupied with that, but maybe once some of that's behind you, let's take another moment to sort of schedule a call, and we can go ahead and talk a little bit more about where you are with things in terms of picking a country and just getting started on some of your application materials. So I look forward to hearing from all of you. I hope you have a good rest of your day, and you'll be getting more information about upcoming workshops, timelines, things of that nature. All right.